Steve, thank you. And I want to invite everyone to what is the last edition of Career Pivots for this season. We've got two great guests lined up by my terrific co-producers, Randy and Ben. And of course, being the last official Career Pivots of the season, I want to thank Chelsea so much, and Kate, without whom we wouldn't have this show. So thank you both for all the work you put in. We have two very interesting guests from the class of 70. Happens to be Randy Helm's class, and there's a connection there. We have Dr. McKim Peterson, who I think was in Berkeley. Is that right, Kim?
Yep, that's correct.
Yep. Graduated from Washington University Medical School, did his family practice residency at the University of Minnesota. He then taught at the University of Minnesota, University of Texas, Houston, University of Massachusetts. He then started a private practice in Rockport, Maine, before retiring to Surry, Maine, where he is trying to learn how to be a self-sufficient farmer and forester, paying particular attention to his carbon footprint. We also have with us Scott Simpson from Randy's class, the class of 70. Over a 40-plus year career, Scott has been a principal in 5 different firms, architectural firms, president and CEO of 2. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and a senior fellow in the Design Futures Council. He's worked on many award-winning projects all over the world, from medical centers, college and university buildings, biotech research laboratories, high-rise office towers, corporate commercial work, even residential projects, and he's lectured widely at schools, including Yale and Harvard. Since retiring from his day job, he's been chairman of the Board of Overseers of Boston's Children's Museum, serves as vice chairman of the board of directors of New England College, where he oversees their active building program, and he consults with design firms around the country. They're both going to, in turn, tell you a little bit about their career journey and how they decided to retire, if that's what you can call what they're doing. Kim, why don't we start off with you and give us a kind of an overview, and everyone present, of how you got to where you are right now.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure how I got to where I am right now, but so my wife was a psychiatrist. We met in medical school, and she did a fellowship in consult liaison psychiatry and loved academics, but she was terrible in the politics of academics. So that's how we ended up leaving academics in 1991 to move to Rockport. And when we moved to Rockport, we bought a very charming romantic house built in 1850, an Italianate villa, and it was wonderful but quite drafty. But it had over an acre of land and a carriage barn. So at that point in our lives, she was interested in fiber. So she was weaving and spinning. So we had rabbits, sheep, goats, llamas, and then she developed tendonitis, so she couldn't do that anymore and went into beading. And when our llama died in roughly 2005, she announced that she'd wanted a horse since childhood. And I thought for a minute, and I wanted to be a cowboy until 3rd grade. And the only reason that I ended up reading was my mother wrote me a book about horses. So I had a child's primer on horses. That was why I learned to read. So we got horses. And even though we were living in town in Rockport, there were no problems, but we didn't have green pasture. And as probably everybody knows, Maine is known for woods, not green pastures. So finding a green pasture turned out to be more of a challenge than we thought. And when we finally found one, it was on the opposite side of Penobscot Bay. So instead of, if we moved, I would have had to commute an hour and a half, and I was used to walking to work. So we didn't plan to move. So we were just going to use it in the summer, maybe build a primitive camp and hang out, do sort of the Maine style of living over there. But, you know, life tends to happen. And had you asked me, you know, when we got our horses, I would have said, I have no plans to retire. I plan to grow old with my patients. So that was my plan. But the first thing I came to realize was I'm terrible at putting limits on my practice. So I was always accepting new patients in. So there was no way my patients were going to age with me since I kept taking new patients. The next thing that happened was in 2009, my mother-in-law developed health problems and needed to come live with us. And our 1850s romantic drafty house wasn't appropriate for a nearly 90-year-old. So we found a modular builder and quickly had a house on our new property across the bay. So now I was commuting an hour and a half, and that started to drag on me. And then at the same time, my father announced that he was realizing how isolated he was living in rural Wyoming. And even though he had to pass 4 siblings on his way to me, he came to live around the corner from me. So suddenly I had care problems as well as horses and a practice. So I'd say that probably influenced my retirement more than anything else. And so in 2015, I ended up totally retiring. The other part is I found I loved the woods in Maine and wanted to learn more about them. And so I got into a big garden and woods, and I've really, apart from dealing with elderly parents who died and a wife who died, I've concentrated on, just as you said, learning how to design a garden that might feed me over the course of the year, and try to harvest wood and sequester carbon in the forest, as well as still enjoying wine from around the world and flying and doing horrible things like that.
Well, that's a nice story, and I'm going to have some follow-up questions, of course. But Scott, let's turn to you and get an overview of your path, and then we'll kind of get going and open this up.
Well, Kim and I have something in common in that he married a psychiatrist and I married a psychologist. So the standing joke in our family is that someday I'll quit my job as an architect and she'll quit her job and we'll form a new firm and we'll call it Shrink to Fit. But I came to Yale many years ago knowing that I wanted to have a career in architecture. So I was one of the lucky ones. And knowing that I was going to become an architect or hope to become an architect, I knew I was going to go to grad school. So I said, well, why do this twice? I decided not to major in architecture at Yale. I majored in English literature. I did take the prerequisites for grad school, calculus and physics and stuff like that. But I really wanted to learn how to. So I took English literature, and it was a really great major and a great decision as it turned out, because in my world, you do a lot of graphic representation and visualization, but if you can't communicate well with clients, you really can't be very successful. So having both sides of that, the graphic side and the spatial side, as well as the reading and writing, was really a career boost for me. After Yale, I spent a year doing construction work in Detroit, and then I went off to Harvard for a degree in design. And I went into a career, I bounced from firm to firm, mostly by accident, and was in a bunch of different firms. I became a principal in 5 different firms over my career, president and CEO of 2 of them. And I had a tremendous amount of fun working with clients and contractors and consultants and designers. It was just it's a great profession because you learn so much. You do so many different things. And it was really I just loved being an architect, and I really enjoyed the design side. Also enjoyed the management side. And I did think about retirement along the way. I figured that when I reached escape velocity, it would be time to put myself on a glide path. Now, escape velocity is when you launch out of Earth, a gravitational field, and you achieve a certain altitude where you no longer need booster rockets. And then you're on this glide path, and you get to decide more of how you're going to spend your time. And as an architect, you can titrate your time. You can get engaged in different levels, different ways. It's hard to do that as a doctor, but it's a lot easier to do that as an architect. So when I left the big firm, I went through a series of mergers and acquisitions. So when I left my final firm, we had thousands of people on staff. It was a very large firm. And I got off that big boat when they paid me my last check for the buyout. And stuff started sort of falling in my lap. I did some consulting work. I became a college trustee. I did the occasional design project. I'm working some houses right now and doing an athletic center for a college. I was chairman of the board of overseers of the Boston Children's Museum for a number of years. I now teach at Harvard at the Advanced Management Design Program. But the biggest boost, the biggest fun is the travel we do internationally and the 5 grandkids. Mm-hmm. So right now things sort of fall into my lap, and my rule of thumb is this: if somebody asks me to do something or get engaged or somehow become involved in something, if my inner voice doesn't say hell yes, I just don't do it. And I think the ideal retirement is to be able to do what you really want to do for the right reasons. And if you can find that sort of peace of mind and that ability to do that, then you get really wealthy, because real wealth is the ability to control the time and how you spend it. So I just try to enjoy every day and have fun doing what I'm doing and be as much as I can. And so far, it's been a tremendous amount of fun.
So, one of the things I think a lot of people do address as they get close to whatever retirement age is these days is, when is the right time? I mean, some people think about it more advertently. Some people, it just kind of unfolds. Did those thoughts ever occur to you, Kim? I mean, thinking ahead about, what would be the right time?
Not exactly. I mean, partly it was just, as I mentioned, life events. The right time for me happened to be perfect because the year I retired was the year my father went downhill. So I was able to spend a lot of time with him. But did I know it ahead of time? No.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Scott?
I knew there would come a time when I wanted to step away from the full-time job. And I think that point of transition is when you get to a certain level in your career and you realize the most important thing you can do at that point is get the next generation ready to take over and train your successor. And when you get to that point, then you're getting to the time it's time to step away. And if you do a really good job and get the right people in place behind you, they'll do a better job than you did. But I think Kim is right. He's sort of overtaken by events. Sometimes it's circumstantial. Sometimes it's accidental. Sometimes it's deliberate. In my case, it was more deliberate than not. But I think people sort of know when the right time is. And sometimes it's health-driven. Sometimes there are health reasons that get in the way. But I just reached the point where it was time to try other things and see what was going to happen next. And I did not have a definitive plan when I stepped away from the big job. I thought, well, let's see what happens.
So, it's interesting. I retired at one point somewhat early, I suppose, in some people's view, but and then I got bored, and that's when I decided to launch, my current endeavor back about 7 years or so ago, born out of my interest in AI and how it was impacting, in particular, career management. But so let's open this up. I mean, people from our audience this evening have any questions for our guests? Somebody want to either unmute themselves or?
I had it's Jeff, and maybe kind of still in the young whippersnapper crowd, although I feel like I'm getting old. I'm the type where I enjoy what I do professionally. I work with startups and things like that, and do some other operational work, things that I can control. And I don't have a lot of hobbies. I don't fish, and I don't golf or things like that. So I kind of envision this sort of not retirement path. And I don't know if I'm copping out because at some point, just to sort of enjoy it or do it, or say, hey, look, I know other people, they were doing their deals or whatever right to the end, and they miss out. I'm just sort of interested in, in any thoughts in that regard, because that's just, go ahead. If any of you want to address that point.
Well, I've got a prediction for you, Jeffrey. Sooner or later, you'll get to the point where you know it's time to do something else. And I can't say when that's going to be, but there'll come a time when you say, okay, I've done that. I've learned what I can learn. I've passed the baton to the next generation. It's time to do something new and different. You may not have a definitive plan, but that will happen to you. And just be ready for it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And then, as he said, the question is, do you do it in the area that you're already working in, or you're like me, where I suddenly said, wow, there's forestry, there's farming, there are all sorts of things out there that I know nothing about, that fascinated me when I was a young kid, but I neglected. And suddenly I'm enjoying discovering them again.
Yeah. The nice thing about farming, Kim, it's a growth industry. So
until fall comes, and then it's a death industry.
Thank you.
Rob, do you have a question for our guests there? You want to unmute?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for being on tonight. It's really so relevant. My wife just announced at work that she's going to retire on July 1st. So I'm listening for lessons learned for her. I think I'm thinking I'm going to work till I drop, but I don't know. My question is related to what I hear about people who are successful in retirement, that they have a good community of relationships, people that they're very much in contact with, like who's missing you if you don't show up. And I just wonder, how have you maintained that because work serves that so much for us, and wonder how you've been able to maintain that community in retirement.
Well, when you first retire, you're going to feel adrift for a while because the routines are not there. You're not commuting to the office. You don't have the meetings. You don't have all that stuff you have to do, the full inbox, all those emails you have to answer. It's a very different feeling. And you're going to feel kind of weird for a while. And then things begin to backfill and little things begin to happen. You begin to structure an approach. So I predict with your wife that she'll feel a little weird for 2-3 months at least. And then she'll find her feet and she'll get onto something new and interesting. What do you think, Tim?
Kim, have you been able to maintain that relationships while you're gardening?
Oh, yeah. Well, the main thing I didn't mention is when we were in medical school, we had a really close friend who was in law school. And partly why we ended up in Rockport, Maine, is he was practicing in Bangor, Maine. And with his retirement, he's moved down closer to where our new place is. So we've kept a very close friendship with him during that whole time. So, yeah. I'm able to have very close friends. On the other hand, when COVID hit, I hardly knew the difference because, gardening and forestry, you're pretty much alone.
Yeah.
If I may have a follow-up question, I'm wondering about the role of the Yale Alumni Association in maintaining relationships. That's something I envision that I would continue with. I'm just wondering, Scott and Kim, is this a reintroduction to Yale alumni for you all, or are you already involved with alumni activities?
Well, I was reunion chairman for our 30th and I became reunion chair for the 50th. So that's an automatic network. In fact, I'm doing this tonight because of Randy. He makes me do stuff. So I do whatever Randy says. But I want to circle back to your question about relationships. And I would say that it's important that you learn how to make new friends as well as keep the old friends.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like somebody's sharing their screen. I don't know what's going on.
There we go.
Oh, you're back.
Okay.
Your networks are never static. They'll ebb and they'll flow and they'll change, they'll grow. But it's important to stay open and connected and meet new people. And as if you have kids, have grandkids, they grow up, you meet people. That's what keeps it interesting and vital.
Yeah. And I must say, my connection with the Alumni Association, when my wife was alive, we pretty much ignored. I mean, I was aware of Yale, but I didn't do anything specifically. But after she died, I found the Alumni Association was where I reached out to try to, make connections and meet people again. So I really liked it.
That's great. I assume you're both on cross campus, right? If not, Jeff will tell you what the URL is.
Yeah, we're Steve.
For Steve.
Right.
We will place the URL in the chat just very briefly as a reminder to everybody. Cross Campus is Yale's online community and includes more than 16,000 members of the Yale community, 2/3 alumni, 1/3 students, 2/3 Yale College, 1/3 graduate and professional alumni and students. And there've been more than 6,000 unique connections made on the platform. So go join and network.
Hey, Steve, do we have an Act 3 or retirement group already on cross campus?
We don't, and we could.
All right, so there may be that could be an interesting outcome of tonight. Thank you.
I'd like to kick in with a story about Kingman Brewster, who was president when class of 70 was there. He the biography of Kingman Brewster, and I think it was called The Guardians, was told a story about when he knew it was time to retire as president of Yale. And that was because there was a student movement that was all worked up about something, and the head of this student organization wanted to bend Brewster's ear about it. And, Brewster was, of course, a master at defusing and co-opting, some people would say, student protesters and getting everybody to reason together. And he heard himself saying, I wrote a white paper on this some years ago. I'll send it to you. Instead of engaging this young man, and as if this was the first time he had ever heard, of his concerns, he was going to just like say, okay, I got something on the shelf that'll do. He said at that point he realized it was time to move on. And I've been very aware of that in my own life as I, as I sort of transition from work to actually from job to job and then from jobs to retirement, is that when you feel like you've done it before and you did it as well as you could do it, and you don't feel like doing it all over again.
I'd say that's true of me in medicine, that I don't know if it was that feeling of doing all over again, although I suspect it was, but when I was young, the bureaucracy of medicine didn't bother me. And when I got to retirement age, I just found it so awful. And I suspect it was because when I was young, the new ideas they came up with sounded exciting. I thought, wow, change the world. And then as I got older, it was like Kingman, been there, done that. The world didn't change. So I'm not sure what happened, but something happened. And that's partly why I got out of medicine.
Well, I got to say, as an architect, that doesn't happen. Every job, every client, every site, they're all different.
Yeah, but do you have, how about governing boards and groups so you don't have all the rules and regulations?
The psychodynamics of decision making are very fascinating to me. And I learned a long time ago that the most expensive thing about building a building is the cost of making decisions. And if you can crack that, decode that, demystify decision making, you've got it made. So the secret about architecture is that the creative part of it is thinking out the different options. But the harder part and the more important part is, of all the various options you could pursue, what is the one that makes the most sense? So coming down and making maple syrup out of the sap is really where the art is. So it's all about that psychodynamic decision-making process. And it's really quite fascinating.
Yeah. That might be why I gave up on medicine, because it's developed more of a cookbook approach over the years.
Yeah.
I think we've got a question from Douglas Schofield. Doug, you want to unmute? There we go. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Glad to be part of this. I've taken off my mask to talk with you because my 4-year-old grandson isn't right in the room now. I'm looking for some advice. I have an unusual situation. I very abruptly retired, if you will, from my career as a financial advisor. I ran my own company for 20 years. I got cancer, had to shut down and sell it off very abruptly. A few years later, I finally recovered from that and found a whole new career. My wife and I moved to Bhutan and were part of a small group that set up the first private college there. And we were there for 10 years. And last year, fully expected to be there also, except Bhutan closed its doors literally days before we were scheduled to return there because of COVID. I'm now in Colorado, where we have a house, but we have 0 contacts. We've never really been involved in the community. We're here at most a month a year while in Bhutan. And I'm bored. I'm looking for something useful and interesting to do. But my question to the group is, how do you do that in a new community where you have no contacts, no background? How do you get the ball rolling? I'm really trying to do something useful like in entrepreneurship or something with my financial background. Doesn't much matter, but I do want to be useful.
Well, I'd say that all communities have groups of people, affinity groups, churches, synagogues, Kiwanis, line, whatever. There are groups everywhere doing interesting stuff. You have an amazing background in education and financial management, and those skills are, I would think, very much in demand. I'll bet there are community groups that need your help about how to organize their finances, those kinds of things. I'll bet you could easily find some connections and do something really interesting and really useful to the community.
I have an idea. Can you hear me?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Come on, Craig.
Hi, I'm in Northern California in Petaluma, where I run Meals on Wheels, working for a nonprofit called Petaluma People Services Center that does all kinds of community programs. And almost all our people are retired volunteers, like 50 a week I use. And they're fabulous people. They have a sense of community they develop with each other. They get attached to their clients who are full of wisdom and fascinating stories. And they deliver meals to elderly people. And the demand has never been greater than in the last year, when seniors have been scared to go to the grocery store.
Great idea. Great idea.
Yeah, and I would second that. That's what I did. I got involved with a food pantry in our area, and also with a program that was serving congregate meals, but now has had to go to takeout meals. But having grown up in Colorado, what part of Colorado are you in?
Well, I'm just outside Boulder. I appreciate what you're saying, but to be honest about it, I'm really looking for something that would make as full use as possible of my backgrounds in education and finance, and I've been in government.
The idea of advising a nonprofit or part of our group mentors young people, where you might, mentor people.
Doug, we have a participant on tonight who's president of the Yale Club of Colorado. Stephanie Grilly is on. So perhaps through chat, you can connect with her.
Actually, Stephanie is about the only person I know in Colorado.
Oh, well, good. You've done that. Okay, great. I have a suggestion. I mean, you're interested in entrepreneurship, reaching out to some universities and schools, from community college to high schools. I've had a lot of fun teaching business and entrepreneurship the past 5 years for a leading summer enrichment program to some of these top international high school students that come over here. Of course, it got shut down by COVID, but I, sought that out through Villanova. Emily, we have Emily Sandersfield has a question as well. You want to unmute yourself, Emily? Emily, we can't hear you. You have your microphone on?
I think she's making a mute point.
Yeah. Emily, we're gonna move on while you figure out how to get your microphone on. Anyone else? I'm having a little trouble seeing hands come up, but go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, this is Christine Walsh. I'm a graduate of the med school, and I have a question for Kim. So one of the things about being a doctor, as you well know, is that your identity, your emotion is so involved being a doctor, not just what you do, but just being a doctor and all the work you did to get there. And so I guess, Kim, what I'm asking is, how long did that feeling last of like, if I'm not a doctor, if I'm not doing what a doctor does, what am I?
Well, I guess I spent my life trying to not identify only as a doctor. I mean, you're right. It's easy to be consumed by that. And certainly, part of my problem is living in a small town. I didn't know my patients' names that well. I'd bump into them at the grocery store, and I could talk to them about their diabetes or heart disease or who knows what medical problem I was seeing them for. But, being able to say, oh, hi, Joe, or whatever, I was really weak at. And so to a certain extent, I guess I'm glad I left that town, because now when I bump into people, nobody expects to know me. So it isn't quite as bad. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it's mainly because I kind of shied away from that. I don't know why, but, I didn't see myself only as a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Emily, are you set up with your audio?
My host keeps muting me. I'm back.
Go ahead and ask your question. Thank you.
Well, what I was going to try and do is speak to the developing community after retirement. And I am not necessarily using the skills I developed in my 35, 40 years of work. Actually, I'm probably one of the youngest retirees here. I retired at 56. My mother had died the year before, and I decided I was not having fun at work anymore. So I developed a plan. I had something to do every day. I volunteered in the tech lab at the local K through 8 school. I taught kids how to solder and work in wood shop, which had been hobbies. But the thing I have done during this pandemic year that you may try and do is I volunteer with a group that during the pandemic, we have switched to providing our services entirely online through Los Angeles Unified School District. I helped to coordinate reading clubs at 8 underserved schools with the help of the teachers and administrators. And we provide a reading, craft, English vocabulary environment for kids, all on Zoom. So I think there are opportunities for unity online. Actually, with Zoom and people Zooming from their homes, I know a lot more about them than I probably did many of my fellow volunteers before the pandemic, because I'm seeing them with their families and their pets and in their home environments. So,
You know, I found
that's my thought.
When I retired, which was almost 6 years ago, I started the most tumultuous period of my life. And it was, I didn't expect that, but I got a divorce. I moved 7 times in 5 years, twice across the country. And it was really tumultuous. And I think what I found gave me the greatest satisfaction. I tried, going back and taking an interim position in higher ed, which was where my career was, found that it was not satisfying to go back and do that again. But what I did find satisfaction was in reconnecting with friends and renewing friendships and nurturing friendships, which during my working career I had not done as well as I should have. And yet, by the time you reach the age when you can retire, you have made a lot of friends over the years. And so nurturing those friendships, I have found has given me a great deal of satisfaction. And even during COVID, with Zoom and Facebook and email, you can still be in touch with people who you care about, very very conveniently.
Ken Corey, I think you have a question for our guests.
I do. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've kind of recently retired in conjunction with the COVID and all of that. So I'm much in the process of that. And my question is what, especially people who've gone through a bit more, and maybe the last speaker could address this too. And the process of letting go of your intensity, letting go of your investment, letting go of the people. Because I find that to be a bit daunting. I have other things to do and I'm investing in some things, but I think internally that process of releasing something that was so vital and important to me and my identity is still quite a process. So I'm just wondering how people have felt about that.
When I retired as a CEO, that's a position where you're under attack pretty much all day long from all directions. Lots of intense relationships, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but it's a very engaging position. You really can't escape from it. You know what I'm talking about, Randy, because you're a college president and you just can't escape it. But here's the thing, you don't have to be busy all the time. You don't have to be engaged all. You can actually just sit in a chair and look out the window and think about stuff, which is a great joy. And it's like putting down a heavy suitcase. You don't have to lug it around with you for the rest of your life. And think about other things, books you haven't read or people you haven't talked to in a while, things you want to go see something you haven't seen before. Go down the Mississippi River, go through the Grand Canyon on a raft. Have an adventure, but break from the routine And I think you'll find that if you do that and allow some new opportunities to spring up, they will spring up.
Kim, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm probably a poor one to get advice on that because on my group practice, I created a group practice with the idea it could continue after I left it. But unfortunately, I was the force behind the group. And when it was clear I was leaving, they all fled. So the group fell apart and I became the caretaker of the medical records. So I basically still had, you know, it wasn't true physician work, but I was sending out medical records like mad after I first retired. So maybe that sort of helped me transition down a little bit because of that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, the time away and just relaxing is so nice.
I think it is challenging. I've had many people come to me on the career front saying, you know, they'd retired, sold a business, whatever, and fairly quickly decided, you know what, they wanted to be re-engaged. They felt they were out of the loop. I think part of the feeling a lot of us have as we get to this stage is kind of not being needed or having what we have to offer not being welcomed. I see, Rob, you're nodding your head. And here's, Rob, you're an individual who you may have coached people in this area, but why don't you, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think that's part of what keeps people vital is that engagement. And I think what I'm getting from Scott and Kim is each of us need to find our own path in retirement or what our next act might be for that. And Scott's been very positive about it'll come, hang in there. But I don't know if Douglas is as optimistic, but I think it's about putting yourself out there, and that's really important. And I just want to encourage everybody here to turn toward the Yale Network, because I think that is an incredibly untapped font of knowledge of people just from this call tonight who've done these things, and we can learn from each other.
Well, actually, I have a question for the group that was triggered by your comment that your wife just retired or is about to retire, because my wife ended up retiring also very young because of the problems with her mother. So she needed to take care of her mother. And I found that my desire for retirement increased immensely when my wife could go see my grandchildren or whatever, and I was back at work.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned grandchildren, because that is the joy of our lives. It is so much fun to watch them grow up and change every day and learn stuff and interact with each other. It's a tremendous pleasure to see that happen. So we have 5, so we're really blessed. And that is, if I could throw it all away except for that, that is by far and away the best thing that's happened since I retired.
Nancy, do you have a question for our guests?
Yes, good evening. Make a decision to move to something, not away from something. And retirement has been the same. It's retiring to something different, not retiring from the life or the work that I had in the past. And for me, I made a major career change and went back to get the credentials to be a certified appraiser of art and antiques. And then acted on a dream to purchase a home and live in Normandy, France for half of the year, each year. But now I am finding that retirement comes in stages and in waves. And I am looking for the guideposts of knowing the next stage that seems to be building towards the question of, do you age in place and do a self-care kind of situation, or do you make the move to the home? And that scares the living daylights out of me, because I don't know how to make that a positive going towards something. And how do you develop the sense of carrying the depth of experience and who you are and have become, that wealth that you kind of carry within your shell as the necessities of your health change around you, and may push you in a direction you didn't intend to go.
Right.
And I'm wondering about others' experiences here and how you are making some of those your decisions. I am now moving towards my mid 80s, and I'm having a great time. But I know that that's going to change. I don't know when, but I would rather be the driver of that than the responder to it. Any comments?
I don't think we're in charge of our health trajectory in the way we'd like to be. But I'll tell you a quick story about a very dear friend of mine who was the mother of one of my classmates, Gary Clark, who was in Styles. She's 100 years old. She still rides a bicycle. She still drives a car. She just renewed her driver's license online for the next 5 years. She's as sharp as a tack. She's a tremendous person. We can't choose that path. It's a path that finds us, and we have to adapt as we need to, given the circumstances that find us.
Yeah, I would agree with the adaption mode that you're quite wise in knowing that change is going to happen, and just be aware that it might change. And health is a major factor. But I remember one day I went in to see a patient in the nursing home, and the reason she was there is her house had washed into the bay and she had no place to go.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I don't think we've talked about this evening, but it's a pretty important aspect of retirement is the financial aspect. And so far, most of our conversations this evening have been based on the assumption that that you have options, that you have the resources to have options.
Right.
I remember when I first was beginning to think seriously about a timeline to retirement, speaking to, you know, my financial advisors, in my case, TIA CREF, which does for 401ks for educators. And they came at it, and what I thought was exactly backwards. They said, well, tell us the kind of lifestyle you want to lead, and then we'll figure out how to take the assets that you've got in your retirement fund and make that real for you. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. You know, if I wanted to, what if I said I want to have a private jet and a castle in, you know, in France, and you know, there's no way you can make that happen. I said, don't start on that foot. Tell me how much I've got to work with and rely if I live to a ripe old age, and I'll figure out how to live on it. And I think that is, I had a very hard time getting my financial advisors to understand that they needed to tell me what was realistic, not have me tell them, you know, my dreams of you know, sort of a grand lifestyle. I don't know how. I just looking at the faces on screen, I suspect a number of us are retired. I see Gary holding up his hand, but I'd be interested in how others sort of approached the financial side.
I have a few comments on that area. I spent a number of years as a financial advisor, enriching family and friends, and for 6 to 8 years I was a formal advisor with the appropriate credentials and all. When it came to my own situation, I didn't become serious about thinking of retirement until I really grabbed hold of the numbers and took responsibility for myself. And for those of us who have maybe minimal skills, we can work on an Excel spreadsheet. We can set up a projection over 20, 25 years. You start simple and plug in some numbers. How much have I got? Now that's going to take a fair amount of time to go through your assets, but with a little help, you can figure that out. So what do I have? Do I have 500,000? Do I have 2 million? Do I have 5 million? All right, now you've got a number. Forget for the moment how it's invested. It's just an absolute magnitude. Now try growing it over your life expectancy. It's easy to find your life expectancy if you've got the courage to know that the government thinks it knows how long you're going to live. And then ask your spouse or the people you care about, you know, what they think in terms of how long they want you around. You know, My wife wants to go to 95. The government says, well, we'll be lucky to get to whatever. Anyway, we're 76 now. So you have some discussions with people you care about or who share your financial world, and you lock on a number. And if the answer is, well, we got to have enough money to make it to 95, then play with the numbers. If you've started at 2 million and you want to grow it to 95, then you're going to have to then begin to manipulate what the curve looks like. How much can you spend each year? Forget what the professionals say. There's a lot of people who claim to be economists and financial advisors who tell you what percentage of your assets you can take out each year. Grab hold of it yourself, make the numbers work. And look, every once in a while when you get bored, pull the spreadsheet out, take a look at how you're doing. If you're having some good investments, maybe you can either live a better lifestyle or you can push 90 up to 95. If health is getting very bad and things are threatening, pull the spreadsheet out, push it from 95 back to 75 if you're lucky, and have your last 5 or 10 years be really worthwhile. You make the decisions. With all respect to financial advisors, they can't do that for you. Fundamentally, they want to make money off of you managing your money. And then they yak with you in order to give you a good that you can appreciate. But that's fundamentally what they're set about to do, and don't diminish them for that. You're your financial advisor. And once you take control of that, it makes for a lot of comfort. And eventually you get pretty comfortable with that curve line going out over time. And your options become more clear to you. You don't begrudge that you don't have the jet. Who was the gentleman who wanted maybe a jet in France and so forth? Well, you can pencil it in, Randy. Okay, pencil it in, bend the curve a little bit because you're now renting a jet and it's going to cost you X amount per month. Play with it for a while. If it's really exciting and you can bend the curve around a little bit, you've incorporated it into your reality. If you decide that the curve gets totally warped, toss that dream. It's the wrong dream for you and work with ones. But the main thing is you be in control. When I quit both work and mountain climbing, I was a mountain climber in my 40s and so forth. And I had the realization that unlike a lot of my friends, I didn't die on Everest. I climbed it, but I didn't die on it. And most of my friends had died, and they died at about age 40. Well, think what their retirement planning looked like. Hell, they didn't know if they lived through the next climb. Well, that's one way to live. But I think for people who went to Yale, I think that's what this group is about. You've probably got some higher ambitions, and you've got I guess my message is to make it shorter is you've got the ability to take it into your own hands, particularly the financial question, which is the one that was posed that caused my wife to say, don't you have something to say about that? So that's my message. Good luck.
Thank you for that. So I have a question for this group. I mean, I know I was at Yale from 68 to 72. I had a ponytail down to my waist and was quite an activist at the time. Awful lot of Yaleys have an awful lot to contribute. We are certainly in a political time that is perhaps the most challenging I've seen. And I know when I volunteered for various campaigns in the past 4 or 5 years or so, I'm struck by the number of, let's say, people over 50 that are coming out. And I'm curious what the rest of your experience is. I personally, I think it's very important for us to be civically engaged, however you feel about it, and to bring some, I'll just say, wisdom to it. But any thoughts from, feel free to unmute yourself and address it. Well, there we go.
Well, I'll tell you my thought, which is I find it hard to root for any candidate because generally whoever I like loses. So I'll make comments along the way. So I'm actively engaged. For instance, our sheriff recently made a decision that I thought was quite racist. And so I rose up in arms and recruited friends to do it. And I don't know if it's what I did or just he was going to change anyway. So it was nice to see a change. But in terms of political activism, I fear that if I get involved, it's the kiss of death for everybody.
It's ironic because in our time at Yale, our generation was very politically active.
Yeah.
And as we have aged, I think that has faded a little bit. And I think if anything, these last several years have shown us how important it is to stay engaged in some way in civic discourse, because things go haywire in a real hurry if nobody cares. There's that old saying about all it takes for the bad guys to win is if the good guys do nothing. And I think we've come to that point where it's not just our generation, but we have to teach our children about the importance of caring about that and being engaged in some useful way. It turns out my son-in-law just left his law firm. He's now chief of staff to a U.S. senator. And so I get sort of a front row seat to all the good stories in Washington. But he's a guy who's a really good guy, decent guy. And he says, look, our generation has got to step up here, and we got to be connected. We got to be part of the solution. And I think if we stop doing that or feeling that, things can go in the wrong direction really, really fast. And to me, it's a great irony, because when we were younger, we were very, very involved. And that is no longer the case, I don't think, for our generation.
Hi, if I can I'm sorry, if I can make a comment. I've become very politically active since my retirement. So much more so than I think I was even in college in the 60s, because now I have the time to do it. And if you don't want to, someone said that, you know, it might be the kiss of death. Well, if you don't want to back a certain candidate, we do all kinds of things. We have all kinds of registration drives. We have all kinds of local grassroots candidates. We have zoning laws that we're trying to maintain neighborhoods. And I mean, there's just a myriad of things you can do. And I think becoming politically active is so important. As you said, we were the generation of activists. And I think we have the ability and the actually now more of the smarts to do it, more of the experience.
Yeah, so here's a suggestion for the gentleman from Colorado who's looking to make some new friends. Get yourself appointed to the planning board, and you meet more people than it's possible. And they'll all have an opinion.
No, thanks for the suggestion, but I've been on a few boards like that, and I don't have a stomach for it.
Well, if you want to meet people, that'll do it for you.
But I will say I'm very much in sync with what Randy said about the role a financial advisor should play. And at the risk of sounding extremely crass, I'm still in the financial business on a small scale with some of my old clients, and I'm open to taking new ones. So if you want someone with Randy's philosophy, I'm your man.
Now, my financial advisor always tells me that the number doesn't matter at all. It's where you put the decimal point.
I grew up using slide rules. I'm very sensitive to where decimal points are.
Yes, is it Carrie? Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
This is Judy Koff. I'm Gary's.
Oh, Judy.
He's the Yale. I went to Cornell. What Gary didn't tell you is after he retired, he learned how to do woodworking mostly via YouTube, and he does fabulous woodworking stuff. And when he doesn't have a woodworking project, he kind of goes crazy. But he also is we live in Washington, D.C., and there's a club here called the Cosmos Club for intellectuals, for lack of a better word. And Gary is the head for the last 20 years of the Cosmos Club's monthly investment discussion group. And he spends up to 100 or 150 hours every month developing a slideshow presentation, all volunteer for the group. I mean, it's a dues-paying club, but he does it because he wants to keep his brain busy before he doesn't know if he'll get dementia or whatever, but this keeps his brain active. And another, I used to be an official at the Pentagon, and I retired a long time ago. And for 25 years, I've been volunteering as a clown at hospitals and for nonprofits. And Gary started volunteering with me as a clown in 2004 because Donald Rumsfeld's wife suggested to me at a holiday party that we go to Walter Reed Military Hospital. And Gary is a very good clown, and we take squirt guns, and we took magic classes, and we do lots and lots of clowning, except during the pandemic. So what did I do during the pandemic? We couldn't clown. So I don't like to cook, but I like to bake. And because of clowning, you can tell I like to make people smile. I've made thousands and thousands of chocolate covered strawberries and chocolate covered dried apricots that I've donated to the COVID staffs of a half a dozen local hospitals. And I collect cookie tins from neighbors and they just love it. So, you know, you do something that makes you feel good and that makes other people feel good. That's all I have to say.
Great story.
Well, I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. We are approaching our 9 o'clock hour. Thank you so much, Kim and Scott, for donating your time and sharing your stories with us. And thank you for all of you for participating. Check out the great summer programming here and have a very safe holiday. And as I like to say, you know, we are living through a truly extraordinary time with all kinds of challenges for so many of us and our friends and families. And, you know, use compassion, take care of yourselves and each other. And thank you for tuning in for the show and participating.
Sam, I just wanted to add one thing regarding cross campus, not only so that everybody should consider joining it, but I just checked and there are 427 alums on cross campus who have specifically checked a box indicating they want to talk about encore post-retirement careers. 427 alums. You can find them in minutes if you join cross campus.
I'd just like to say as we wrap this up, Ben and I started off this this Career Pivots series in October, I guess. Jeff had suggested we do this, and he also suggested that Sam Sneed had been doing this and would help us. And I just want to say, Sam, you've been the glue that has held this this thing together all year. Ben and I really appreciate your contribution to this. I think there are hundreds of alums who have tuned in to learn about everything from how to become a published writer to you know, entrepreneurship, to making career shifts of pretty dramatic, starting your own company, all that stuff. You've done a great job. You've covered the waterfront and we really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think as you once said in one of our private things, it's we hope we've been useful in some way to some of our alums, and thank you and Ben so much for the great job you've done.
I just want to second that, because Sam, you have been special. I always tell people when we start these shows, it's kind of half Phil Donahue, half Dick Cavett. Both of them have something to learn from you. So, thanks so much for doing this. And it's been a great crowd. We've had a tremendous year. Thanks for everybody for participating, and hope we see you during the summer and the next sessions. Keep coming.
Thank you all. Have a great holiday weekend.
All right. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.